This is the Media Matters Minute, and I'm John Kerr. According to the Department of Commerce, the economy grew at an annual rate of 3.2% in the fourth quarter of 2013. On Fox News' America's Newsroom, Charles Payne claimed that the government shutdown, which occurred in the fourth quarter of 2013, helped spur economic growth.
Our economy has gotten so much traction since the government shutdown, which the mass media has said is an evil, awful thing, and it hurt us. Well, during that period, more jobs were created. During that period, the stock market was up, and we continue to see, as government gets out of the way, the private sector comes in.
Payne is completely incorrect. According to MSNBC's Steve Bannon, the economy could have grown even more without the government shutdown. In addition, Jason Furman of the Council of Economic Advisors claimed the shutdown reduced private sector employment in October by 120,000 jobs. But Payne's comments come as little surprise, as this is just the latest in Fox's campaign to downplay any and all negative effects of the GOP-led shutdown. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
You're elderly, disabled, or poor, and you think you have the right to vote? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania successfully spearheaded an effort to enact a so-called voter identification law, a law that requires every voter to present a state-issued identification card at the polling place before they can vote. The law's supporters claim that the law will combat the voter fraud of a person coming to the polls and claiming to be somebody else. The problem with this claim? It's imaginary. No proponent of the law could even point to a single incident when anything like this actually ever had occurred. But the law has serious consequences. Free photo IDs have not been made available, and so the law effectively disenfranchises a significant percentage of the elderly, disabled, and low-income citizens who, no surprise to the Republican legislature, tend to vote Democratic. Voter suppression is the unspoken but actual intent of this law. And sadly, the United States Supreme Court seems to have no problem with voter suppression laws. But, fortunately, a Pennsylvania trial court recently has ruled that the state voter ID law violates the state constitutional guarantee of a democracy. The case now heads to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which will be the final arbiter of whether in that state the right to vote means all adult citizens actually have that right, or not. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live United.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Illinois AFL-CIO President Mike Kerrigan says the lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of billions of dollars in pension cuts for Illinois public workers came only after years of efforts to negotiate a solution to the unfunded pension obligations. He says the unconstitutional theft of these earned contractually promised benefits is unacceptable.
Some of my quote use that word exactly, pension theft. So we're going to court, and we're confident this public act will be overturned.
Kerrigan says pension payments should have equal high priority to bond obligations, so workers who put in decades of work earning those pensions won't be shortchanged.
Pension payments need to have a high priority in terms of those kind of things get paid first before we have other discussions about spending money on other programs. This is an obligation as a result of contract negotiations, and they need to be honored.
Walmart workers sent an open letter to the new Walmart CEO urging him to work with Our Walmart to improve working conditions and wages for Walmart workers. They said in the letter that low pay, inadequate hours, and unpredictable scheduling isn't good for workers or for the business. And they wrote the new CEO about Barbara Collins, an 8-year employee of Walmart who was fired for speaking out about wages and working conditions. Collins had to visit 3 different food banks in 1 month to feed her family. The workers appealed to new CEO Doug McMillon to be responsive to efforts by workers to get Walmart to treat workers better.
Just because a worker is making money off of tables doesn't mean that the corporation should opt out of paying them a decent wage.
Former restaurant worker Carlos Romero. Romero is High Road organizer with the Restaurant Opportunities Centers in Chicago. Chicago Chicago community activists, including Stand Up Chicago, the Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago, SEIU, Action Now, and the Grassroots Collaborative this week pushed for a higher minimum wage in the city. The groups are backing a voter referendum on the March 18th ballot calling for a city minimum wage of $15 an hour. Romero says it's time that new models were adopted to end poverty wages for restaurant and other low-wage workers, and that should include paying living wages instead of tipped wages for restaurant workers.
There are multiple business models out there that show higher productivity and higher profit by taking care of their workers and by having a highly involved management style. And we offer that as an organization with Restaurant Opportunity Centers.
We stand today not because we want more money, we want justice today.
It's always the same story, even back when I started, 76. Less men, more coal. That's what they want.
I'm fighting for everyone in my community. I live in the south side of Chicago, and it's rough. We all need to come together. The workers all around the nation.
Support Workers Independent News and keep these worker voices on the air by donating now at laborradio.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act Radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Carl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
This is RJ, Richard Eskow, and you are listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio. Thank you for joining us for another segment. We have a lot to talk about this week. We have the State of the Union. We have new economic indicators coming out. We'll be talking about the way that technology is affecting, infecting, and invading our daily lives, as we always do in each episode of this program. And we'll be remembering Pete Seeger. We'll be remembering him by talking about him, but we'll be remembering him also by, in our final hour, talking about some of the issues that mattered most to him, including coal miners and Native Americans. So we have a great show in store for you. I hope you'll stick around. I also want to remind our dedicated listeners, the ones who are on our email lists, the ones who have been following us, the ones who have stuck with us through our changes of personnel, want to remind you that we're changing the name of Take Action News and that we're looking forward to either your votes on some of the names we proposed, including We Act Radio News and The Breakdown, which was the name of my old program. We're also soliciting your ideas and suggestions, which you can tweet to me at RJESKOW. And, I'm thinking of giving my opening monologues titles, too. And if I were to give this one a title, I guess I would call it Hellboy, Healthcare, and Social Security. And if that title doesn't make any sense to you, it will either make more or less when I'm done. Those of you who are watching on our YouTube channel, and we do have a YouTube channel, I urge you to check it out by going into YouTube and doing a search on Take Action News or Take Action News in Eskow. Those of you who are watching will see that I'm still wearing an apparatus on my left hand, and I'm left-handed, a kind of splint, which makes me look like Hellboy, the movie character with the one gigantic claw for a hand. And the reason I'm wearing this, as I mentioned once before, is that I've been suffering from carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, you get carpal tunnel syndrome a couple different ways, and I've been guilty of both of them. One is I write for a living. That's my day job. So I have gotten this because I type for 12 hours a day or so. Two, I do music. I play the guitar. I even had some paid recording and writing work last year, which I'm not allowed to discuss publicly because I did it incognito. But as a result, if you type for 12 hours a day and then sit down and play the guitar, you're pretty much going to get carpal tunnel. Now, I'm fortunate in that I'm able to buy the headset and the other apparatus so that I can dictate my writing, create some creative errors sometimes, but I try to be vigilant about that. So I dictate my writing. Now, what does all this have to do with Social Security and healthcare and politics in the State of the Union? I'll tell you. Now, when I went to the physical therapist for this, she started working on my shoulder and my neck. because she was releasing the nerve that goes down to my wrist. My wrist was too sensitive to work on. That is what they call a holistic approach, that you're experiencing pain in your wrist, but the pain originates further up the nerve, so you treat the whole neck. Now, here's the problem. I, like most working Americans, have private health care insurance. Private health care insurance has an arbitrary series of caps on treatment, like physical therapy. So I can only get a limited number of treatments to relieve this carpal tunnel situation, no matter how much I may need the treatment. Why does that matter? It matters because a lot of Americans, if they can't get treatment for a disabling condition like carpal tunnel, they can't work. What happens if they can't work? Well, either they go and get surgery for their problem, which will cost many, many times what physical therapy would cost, which means we have a runaway cost in our healthcare system, and it is much more expensive than any other developed nation's healthcare system. But two is if they can't get that, then they go on disability. Now, one of the primary sources of disability in the insurance in this country is the Social Security system. All the politicians in Washington who complain about the cost of the Social Security system seem oblivious to the fact that we have a healthcare system which is making those costs worse by not taking the kind of holistic approach to our economy, our government finances, and our social contract with one another that my physical therapist takes toward my carpal tunnel. So when the day comes that I have to end that physical therapy, fortunately, I have some alternatives. I can try to pay out of pocket, which I think I could manage to do, or I can just continue to dictate my work and put the music on hold. Okay, but not everybody has those kinds of options. We have a broken social contract. We have a broken view of finances. Why is that? Because Washington and our political system has become suffused with an ideology that's almost invisible to those who are inside it. It's an ideology that says you're not allowed to think holistically about these kinds of problems. You're not allowed to think holistically about the fair way to treat someone who's injured as a result of the work they do, because that ideology, that new and extreme ideology that's grown up in the last 30 or 40 years, says what? It says that to do that is socialistic. To do that is promoting the role of government in our lives, and we mustn't do that. Now, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Republican, had no problem promoting the role of government in our daily lives. Richard Nixon, a Republican, had no problem proposing a minimum income for all Americans, just as Eisenhower boasted in the 1956 Republican Party platform that he had added millions of new Americans to the Social Security rolls. It's only in the recent years, the post-Reagan years, that it's become impossible politically to discuss proposals that are popular with most of the American people. A public option for health care, 51% of Republican voters wanted it. Increase to the Social Security system, vast majorities of voters from Tea Party to Democrats to independents want the system increased, would even pay more in taxes to do it. On and on and on and on and on and on. So one of the things we're going to do here on this program today and every day is talk about ways to reintegrate the social contract. Go into those areas where there are false do not enter signs and say, we're going to talk about those things that are sensible, things that are humane, and things that are fair. Now, in the coming segments, we'll talk about Social Security, we'll talk about health care, but we'll do it in the context of the State of the Union message in this hour. We have 3 guests to talk to us about it that you'll find very interesting, so please stick with us. I'm Richard Eskow. This is Take Action News, and we'll be back after these messages.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Jane Kuger of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
And we are back on Take Action News. This is Richard Eskow, and our guest in this segment is Robert Borisage. Bob Borisage is the founder and president of the Institute for America's Future in Washington and co-director of its sister organization, the Campaign for America's Future. I've got to pronounce the name right because I work there as a senior fellow. Bob is also contributing editor at The Nation, and you can see his writing at the Huffington Post and elsewhere. Bob, thanks so much for being with us.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Good, very good.
Good. Well, obviously the topic du jour is the State of the Union. I wanted to ask you a couple things about that. First of all, you complimented the president for his attitude towards at least making the case for diplomacy, but we're focusing on domestic policy here. And about that, you wrote, passive voice populism doesn't cut it. It doesn't help people understand how we got here nor how we got out. On the new populism, the president chose to punt. What do you mean by that?
Well, the president, the speech itself, I think, scrubbed almost all of the populism out of it. But he did have one central pivot where he said, look, even though we're in recovery, the hard fact is it's not working for most Americans. Inequality is deepening. the rich are making out, but most Americans aren't seeing any rewards, and too many people still don't have jobs. So there was this kind of frame that is the populist frame of an economy that's working for the few and not for the many. But his description about why that is for many decades this has been building up because of globalization and technology. Two impersonal, anonymous, remorseless forces that presumably are beyond human control and happened to us. And that's a very passive voice about how we got to this state of an economy that only works for the few, as opposed to the reality that, the corporations and the elites decided in the mid-'70s they didn't like the arrangements, and they started to dismantle the arrangements that were built during the New Deal and World War II that helped create the broad middle class. And they did trade and tax policies that helped multinationals ship jobs abroad and drive down wages at home. They did taxes that brought taxes down on the rich and built loopholes that only they could take advantage of. They slashed spending on basic infrastructure needs and investments for our future. They did a range of things. They deregulated finance, obviously, and allowed Wall Street speculation to build until it blew up the economy. And middle-class families and homeowners were the victims of that. And so the fact is this was done to us by people who benefited from it. But the president wanted not to have anything to do with that kind of active voice populism. He had kind of a passive voice populism, which says, look, we're in this state, but it's because of these remorseless and anonymous forces.
Or as they used to say in my old neighborhood, hey, what are you going to do? So if we move to an active voice, first of all, I guess before I even get to what active voice populism would look like, I guess, what's your best guess? How's this going to play publicly? Because my sense is people are angry. People know who they're angry at. How do you think? We're in an election year. Congress is certainly, I don't want to say up for grabs because I don't think the Democrats will get it, but it's in contention. Senate up for grabs. How do you think this is going to play politically, this passive voice approach to populism?
Well, I think the specifics of the agenda the president put out, raise the minimum wage, paycheck fairness for women, change our workplace rules so they're not like the era of Mad Men, but give paid family leave and paid vacation and what have you. All those specifics are very popular, and all of them are opposed by the Republican Party. And so he's drawing a set of lines there that I think are, and a set of fights to come that will make it clear to people who's on what side. On the other hand, I do think that, look, if you're going to go into passive voice, if it is remorseless things that have done this to us, then the sense is nothing can be done to change them. It's just globalization, it's happening to everybody, technology, we have fewer jobs because we don't need so many people to work, and you just got to, what can be done? You just got to live with it. And so it takes the energy out of the position. If you go to active voice populism and you name names, you talk about the interests and the people and the elites that have done these rules and the rules they did that rigged the game for the rich, then there's two things. One is you gain a great deal of credibility. People get that you're on their side and you're prepared to take these people on. And the other is you have a harder time raising money. Because the rich get really angry at you, and the corporations get really angry, and you build a lot of very powerful enemies. And so for politicians, you got to decide. And I think it is the case that the public increasingly gets, in this post-occupied moment we're in, they get that the rules are rigged. And they've got politicians like Elizabeth Warren, leaders who are prepared to say that and to name names and to challenge the way the rules got rigged. And that increasingly, I think, as that voice gets louder and draws more attention, other politicians are going to have to decide where they stand in relationship to that. And it's going to be notable where they stand, whether they're prepared to be clear about what side they're on and who rigged the system, or whether they're prepared to be passive about it.
And if you're a member of Congress at this point, that's not an easy decision sometimes. You and I have both talked to members of Congress who know, for example, they can name you the guys who were tough on banking and told it like it was, and then they came in and spent $3 million on their opponent in the district as a form of payback. So they know, on the one hand, I'd hate to be a progressive member of Congress right now in certain districts. So let's strategize for a second. What do you do if you're sitting on the fence on this one? You'd like to say the right thing. You're afraid of that money coming your way, and you're a member of Congress. Where do you turn? How do you shape your rhetoric? Who can back you up? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think you do two things. If you're in a swing district and you're really vulnerable, so that a lot of these progressives are in very Democratic districts, they're not going to get beaten, and they should be full-bore active populists and naming names and going out after it. Secondly, if you do that in a visible way, even if you're in a swing district, you can raise a lot of money from small donations around the country, as Elizabeth Warren has demonstrated, that can back you up, and you can get a lot of volunteers, and you can get a lot of energy in that position. Or if you're more cautious and more scared than that, you can pick your spots. You don't have to go after everybody. You can decide, I'm going after the banks, not the multinationals, but I'm going after the banks. I'm going to make that clear. And you can contribute to the debate even while you're, keeping quiet about other things, because you want to keep some bridges to different parts of the community that's financing your campaign, or who you don't want to finance your opponents so much. And that's what politicians have to do. They have to figure out how they're going to survive. But I think what's different now and what's interesting is with the development of real leaders with a platform and a megaphone who are out there naming the names and challenging this stuff, that increasingly politicians are going to have to factor that in. They aren't going to just be able to have passive voice and get away with it. They're going to have to increasingly decide are they going to be part of this process, or are they going to stand outside of it and lose that energy?
Well, it sounds to me, listening to you, we've talked about the politician's dilemma, but it sounds to me that there's an obligation on the part of, for lack of a better word, the progressive movement, that the movement itself better be organized, coordinated, prepared to give money and support to the people who speak up, because those politicians are going to need the help, and it's up to us to provide that. And if you agree with that, what are some places people can go to stay on top of those races and maybe figure out how they can help? Do you have any links or whatever?
Well, you can come to the Campaign for America's Future for the issue debate. We're on a whole range of those issues. That's at ourfuture.org. You can, the Progressive Citizens Campaign Committee, PCCC, the Democracy for America, the DFA, Move On, are all very active in terms of trying to identify progressives in different races and gain active support from small donors and activists for those candidates. And so any one of those outlets can help you identify folks, etc. The electoral page on Daily Kos, which is very strong and does a lot of just kind of basic information if you want to get into electoral races about where you can be effective and who's an actual progressive champion. I think the big thing, though, is even bigger than that. We had Occupy, which transformed this debate. And what you saw when Occupy made it without an agenda, and certainly without being able to last very long, when it put on the table that this economy was working for the 1% and the 99%, the discussion of this exploded because it was so true and so ignored.
So in other words, as we wrap up, I guess I would say, in a sentence, besides supporting politicians, we have an obligation to back that message and take it to the streets, figuratively and perhaps literally, and to keep ourselves...
This is going to only change if people are in the streets with their pitchforks. Everybody keeps waiting for the pitchforks. We haven't seen them yet, other than Occupy, and we need a lot of pitchforks before we get this thing changed.
All right, thanks so much. Safe pitchforks, of course, but Robert Borisage, co-director of the Campaign for America's Future, thanks so much for being with us, Bob.
My pleasure. Take care.
You bet. This is Take Action News. We'll be right after this break with more on recent events in the economy and Social Security. Stick with us.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
And we are back on Take Action News. This is Richard Eskow, and we are talking about the State of the Union, both the President's address and the actual State of the Union. Our next guest is Dean Baker. Dean is an economist, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. He writes everywhere. He's quoted everywhere. He appears everywhere. He has written a number of books. His latest, written with Jared Bernstein, is Getting Back to Full Employment. His other books include, I love this title, The End of Loser Liberalism, Making Markets Progressive. Dean, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Listen, I wanted to ask you at a couple points during this State of the Union. I thought, wonder what Baker is thinking about this. And you've written a couple things. You've written about the impact that a $10 and 10-cent minimum wage might have on the poverty numbers. And you also wrote that anyone who thinks a $10 and 10-cent minimum wage is too high should consider that from 1938 to 68, we raised the minimum wage in step with productivity growth. Now, I've quoted you on this a couple times. What does that mean? Can you just explain in layman's terms for a minute what we did for those 30 years and what we've done since and why it matters?
Yeah, well, the distinction, a lot of people have been focused on what the minimum wage was in 1968. That was its high point, and they've been talking about restoring its purchasing power, which would be a bit over $10 an hour, somewhere in that neighborhood. So what that would mean is that someone working an hour in 2014, if we were to do it tomorrow, would be able to buy basically the same basket of goods and services, or an equivalent basket, I should say, to what they bought with an hour's worth of work back in 1968. Now, the point I was making here is if you go back, we first instituted the federal minimum wage in 1938. From 1938 to 1968, the minimum wage just didn't keep constant in terms of purchasing power. It actually rose basically in step with the economy's ability to produce. So as we got more productive, as we were able to produce more in an hour of work, more goods and services, workers at the bottom, minimum wage workers, shared in that increase so that their wages basically moved in step with economic growth. They got their share of economic growth. So what I was saying here is let's imagine that continued. We did that from 38 to 68, when I should point out the unemployment rate was under 4%. We did that for 30 years. Suppose we had continued to do that for the next 45 years. Today the minimum wage would be around $17 an hour. So if we continued that practice, we'd be looking at a minimum wage that's more than twice as high as what it is today.
So now, just so that I understand and our audience understands, what happened in 1968 to change that? Was the law rewritten? Did something else happen?
Well, it was never under law that it followed that. That was a practice. So Congress repeatedly raised the minimum wage, as it has often done since. We went a long period where we didn't. The Reagan era, we didn't have any increases at all. But when we did have increases, what we were at best trying to do was restore the purchasing power. So we never had it in a law that the minimum wage would track productivity growth. It was just, in effect, the practice that when we raised the minimum wage every few years, we were doing it in such a way that workers at the bottom got their share of economic growth.
So, and when we did, you were saying, among other things, the economy, obviously there were many other factors, but it certainly didn't prevent the economy from growing, nor did it prevent, the common argument is that if we increase the minimum wage, it will increase unemployment, people won't be able to hire new workers. But in 1968, the unemployment rate was roughly half what it is today, and I think that's your point. So the president is proposing 10-10, which will put it, I gather, more or less in line with changes in purchasing power. But I'll start with a personal question. When you hear some of the arguments against a position like this made over and over again, despite the fact that they've been disproven historically, argued against logically, and defeated in a number of different ways, I've asked Krugman this question, I've asked Bill Black this question, how do you keep from going nuts?
You're in this long enough. I've been, in D.C. well over 20 years in policy debates. You just get used to it. I mean, I'm constantly amazed how people can make arguments that are often utterly absurd. I just was defending Krugman the other day because they were saying he was calling for Greenspan to have a housing bubble. Well, I was very happy back in 2002. I got Krugman to write a piece warning about the housing bubble. Utter nonsense. But, just give you another example that comes up all the time. There's this whole crew running around Washington that we have to worry about the retirees. Our baby boomers are retiring, and it's going to bankrupt our children and grandchildren. At the same time, and in some cases the same people, we're supposed to be worried that robots are going to throw us all out of work and there won't be any jobs. Well, you could have one or the other of those as at least a logical possibility. In other words, we could at least logically have a story where we have, all these retirees and no one working. We're all waiting around for someone to change our bedpan. You could also logically have the story that there are no jobs because the robots are doing everything. You can't.
Right, they're
both.
Changing the bedpans.
Exactly.
The robots are doing.
Exactly. But we have people in Washington, prominent people, or I should say very serious people, who will make those two arguments simultaneously.
Well, it's fascinating. Well, sure. I guess, are the robot, first of all, look, I got to ask you this question because, I think when it comes to robots and technology, there are two arguments. One is that they've already taken our jobs, so don't expect us to put people back to work. The other is that everything is going to change when they do take our jobs. And I also ask myself, well, which is it? This report's gone around saying that a new study, British study of American jobs, saying 49% will be eliminated by automation. What do you think of that? Just looking forward for a second. I mean, you're absolutely right about the contradiction, but as long as robots came up, what do you think about the real impact of automation going forward? Do we even know?
Well, we don't know. I mean, first off, there's no evidence to date. Productivity growth has actually slowed, not sped up. This is productivity growth. People talk about like it's something alien. We've had productivity growth for, centuries, and that's what it is. It's a form of productivity growth, but that's what we're talking about. And the data actually show productivity growth has slowed in the last 5 years. I don't necessarily expect that to continue, but just, if we're just looking at the data, it goes the wrong way. But the other point is, what does this mean? Let's say we saw more rapid productivity growth. Well, in principle, that should make us wealthier. And to say we're going to destroy jobs, you got to remind these guys in Britain, a job is not a fixed amount of time. People used to work 6.5 days a week. They put in 70 hours a week. We got down to a 40-hour work week back in the 30s with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Same act actually created the minimum wage. In Europe, they continue to have shortening of the work, in some cases work week, also work year. 5 weeks a year of vacation is standard. Many countries have 6. Paid family leave. The idea that we're going to be made poor by technology is nuts. Now, by how we govern that technology, the rules we put in place, that can make us poor. But the idea we should fear the technology is crazy. We might want to fear the people who are controlling the technology, but not the technology.
So there might be a good 90-minute-a-week job saying, "Hey, robot, you missed the spot." And I actually did a review. I reviewed Tyler Cowen's books on this subject. There is this belief that we will someday live in a dystopian future where there is a permanent, impoverished, the word shantytown has even been used, majority of 85% or so, and then 15%. It's interesting how technology seems to always be a mirror for people's self-image. Then there'll be a sort of overlord 15% of enormously wealthy, entrepreneurial, creative geniuses, by which we mean people who will come up with the next version of, I don't know, Angry Birds.
Just to be really clear, we have to beat up these people. I don't mean the people who are doing the technology. Many of them are wonderful people. I mean the people who are trying to tell us this. And by the way, I don't mean physically, because I've been accused of threatening people. I don't mean physically beating them up. Beat up their arguments, because it really is absurd. Because you go, okay, how are these people getting rich because they make robots? They're real smart. Let's grant them all that, innovative, whatever, wonderful. Okay, but how do they get rich by it? Well, they get rich because we have patents that allow them to get very rich. Well, that's set in Congress. That's not set by the technology. Congress says a patent is 20 years. Congress says that a patent can be enforced very broadly. Jeff Bezos runs into court and says, I have a patent on one-click shopping. He actually did that. I mean, he lost the suit, but, he should have more than lost the suit. He should have had to pay a huge fine for wasting the court's time and trying to defeat his competitors in the court rather than the marketplace.
And one-click shopping happens on the internet, which, as I recall, is government-developed technology. So a lot of these patents, I think, are for technology that's dependent on things created by the American taxpayer. So I think we're going to have to pretty much leave it there, except to say that, unless I'm mistaken, we can close, and correct me if I am, but we can close the robot overlord discussion by saying that you pointed out robots or automation in general is, in essence, an increase in productivity. If we had a minimum wage that tracked with productivity, everybody would win. Is that correct?
That's right, and that's exactly the sort of world we should be looking to have. We want good productivity growth, and we want everyone to share in it.
All right, Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
You bet. This is Richard Eskow. We will be right back on Take Action News after these messages, and we'll be talking more about the State of the Union, real and rhetorical. Stick with us.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away.
Education beyond high school. A path to opportunity and success for our young people. And the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream. Because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on healthcare while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
When you go on a road trip, you're careful. You follow the signs to arrive at the right place. It's the same online. Read the internet signs along the way, or you may be led astray. For example, look for the .gov at the end of the web address. If it isn't .gov, it isn't the real Social Security website. People are often victimized by misleading advertisers who use terms like Social Security or Medicare to trick the public. These companies charge a fee for free Social Security services. These services include changing your name and getting a new Social Security card. There's no need to pay for services Social Security offers for free. Go to www.socialsecurity.gov. And remember, if it isn't .gov, it isn't Social Security.
And we are back on Take Action News. This is Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and of all our bumper music, I think I like that ska music the best. Our next guest is Damon Silvers. Damon is the Director of Policy and Special Counsel for the AFL-CIO, but he is also a great strategic thinker, and I always look to him for that. Damon, thanks so much for being with us. Damon?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks so much for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Well, you wrote a piece before the State of the Union message called How We Got Economic Inequality and Why the President Needs to Talk About It. And in that piece, you said the president faces a choice of rhetoric on Tuesday night, but that choice is not just about political gamesmanship. There is an issue of simple credibility. It is a chance to speak to the people directly and gain what political momentum may be gained by telling the truth about economic equality. How do you think he did?
Well, I think that the president did, in terms of what he needed to do in this space, he did quite well in one area and quite poorly in another. He told the truth about the fact that the challenge of economic inequality is basically about people's wages being stepped on, about suppressed wages, and that we need to raise wages and that we need to do it broadly in our society. That inequality and wage suppression is not simply a problem of the poor. It is a problem of the majority of Americans having declining and stagnant incomes. He was very good on that, and much better than I expected. But on the question that I think you were really leading with, which is the question of talking about the causes of inequality, about the fact that inequality didn't just happen, that powerful people in this country with influence over our politics made it happen. On that subject, and by the way, made it happen and are perpetuating it. Right, and trying to keep it going, trying to keep inequality a continued fact of our national life. On that subject, the president really did not step up, and I was disappointed but not surprised.
And how about on the specifics of the policy? We heard about a new savings program. We heard about the minimum wage. We heard about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I know you have feelings about, as do I. How do you think he did on the specifics?
Well, I think that he put forward two things that are really important, actually three things that are really important and positive. They were extending unemployment insurance for the long-term unemployed, the victims of the economic crisis, raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour nationally, and issuing an executive order to raise the minimum wage, to raise wages for federal contract employees to $10.10 an hour immediately. Those are all very good things. There are some limitations to those things, and there's some big limitations to those things. One of them that a lot of us noticed was that there are federal employees, not federal contractor employees, but actual federal employees who are not paid $10.10 an hour. It would be nice for the president to have said that steps ought to be taken for the people who actually work for the federal government, work for him, so that they get paid the minimum wage he's asking for all Americans. The second point is much broader. Is that the minimum wage, while the minimum wage helps all working people by raising the floor, we've got a wage stagnation problem that reaches right to the 90th percentile of our society. We need broad measures to raise Americans' incomes, and there's no way to get around that without talking about worker bargaining power and collective bargaining. And the president didn't do that. I think that's going to be a continuing conversation, because until we restore worker bargaining power, we're going to continue to have stagnant wages. So I think we're going to be coming back to that. And then you asked about the savings program that was announced in the State of the Union. There, the president was really good at identifying the problem that we've got a serious retirement security crisis in this country, that our pension system has largely collapsed. Once again, this comes to this issue of these things didn't happen by accident. The pension system didn't collapse as a natural act. Employers pulled back. Employers abandoned their employees around this question. But the solution he offers is really woefully inadequate. What the president should have been doing there is talking about two things. One is the need to expand Social Security, and the other is the need for employers to once again take some responsibility for their employees' retirement security. Then you talked a moment about trade. The president spoke very briefly about his trade agenda, about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the idea of fast track. He was very brief and perfunctory about it, but
just to jump in, if I was pushing a policy that was that unpopular, I'd be brief and perfunctory too.
Well, yeah. What I was going to say about that was, former Congressman Dave Bonya wrote in the New York Times yesterday that you can't be for raising wages and for expanding the NAFTA trade model. These are totally incompatible things. And it comes back to the consequences of not being clear about how did we get here. Right? Because trade policy that was designed not to open up markets, but to drive down wages, right? What is a critical aspect of what's happened to the American middle class. And so if you don't talk honestly about the causes, you're not going to be pursuing effective policy solutions.
Well, in the minute or two we have left, I want to just get back for a second. You mentioned the fact that the president didn't talk about collective bargaining, and it's true that if you look at the peak years of the middle class, there was also a much larger union membership. Collective bargaining it was a much more powerful economic force. So it's not hard to see the causality there, I would argue. But in terms of practical suggestions, what might the president have said in 90 seconds or so? What might the president have said about that could have shifted the equation?
Well, I think with most of these things, this is about driving a politics, right? The president's got limited power right now with a divided Congress, but he has limited hard power, but he's got big soft power. Right. And, frankly, the president should have been holding up individuals who frankly, made his speech possible. He should have been holding up Walmart workers and fast food strikers, people who took huge risks to raise wages for themselves and their fellow workers, and some of whom have been fired illegally. And where charges have been issued by the National Labor Relations Board against their employers. Those are the heroes of the issue the president's trying to raise. Right, and instead the president sort of pled with employers to do stuff voluntarily. It's very clear employers have absolutely no intention of doing.
So if you had the opportunity, I know you've met with him before, but if you had the opportunity to say one sentence to the president of the United States about a shift in policy, what would that sentence be?
My sentence to the president would be this: Mr. President, you know these things. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Right. The question is, what you need to do is have the courage to lead.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it with that, and I think that is well said. I also think, by the way, that your sentence may have had a semicolon or two in it. But that's not against the rules here.
All my sentences do.
Right. Mine have many clauses. Thank you so much for being with us, Damon Silvers, AFL-CIO.
Thank you very much.
Now, in our next hour on Take Action News, we're going to be looking at some of the issues of that Pete Seeger cared about. Actually, that's going to be in our final hour, but stick with us because we'll also be talking about technology and its effect on our daily life, on our privacy, and on our civil liberties. We have some very interesting and unusual stories for you coming up, so please stick with us. Again, this is Take Action News. This is RJ Richard Eskow reminding you that we're getting a new name and we need you to give us that name, reminding you that you can see us here same time every week, reminding you that we have a YouTube channel where you can hear all of this again along with video of me fidgeting and looking restless in my seat. And as a final comment on the State of the Union message, I would only say this. On those occasions where we've seen political courage, which sometimes is described as populism, political courage on economic issues, we've seen politicians be richly rewarded for it in recent years. We've seen a president reelected by taking on a more populist agenda. We've seen a party do better than expected by taking on a populist agenda. We've seen people like Elizabeth Warren come from behind and win victories because of a populist agenda. Populism isn't just the right thing to do, it's the politically smart thing to do. We're all for it here at Take Action News. Please stick with us. I'm Richard Eskow. We'll be back after these messages.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM, broadcasting live from Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in D.C.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Illinois AFL-CIO President Mike Kerrigan says the lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of billions of dollars in pension cuts for Illinois public workers came only after years of efforts to negotiate a solution to the unfunded pension obligations. He says the unconstitutional theft of these earned contractually promised benefits is unacceptable.
Some of my quote use that word exactly, pension theft. So we're going to court, and we're confident this public act will be overturned.
Kerrigan says pension payments should have equal high priority to bond obligations, so workers who put in decades of work earning those pensions won't be shortchanged.
Pension payments need to have a high priority in terms of those kind of things get paid first before we have other discussions about spending money on other programs. This is an obligation as a result of contract negotiations, and they need to be honored.
Walmart workers sent an open letter to the new Walmart CEO urging him to work with Our Walmart to improve working conditions and wages for Walmart workers. They said in the letter that low pay, inadequate hours, and unpredictable scheduling isn't good for workers or for the business. And they wrote the new CEO about Barbara Collins, an 8-year employee of Walmart who was fired for speaking out about wages and working conditions. Collins had to visit 3 different food banks in 1 month to feed her family. The workers appealed to new CEO Doug McMillan to be responsive to efforts by workers to get Walmart to treat workers better.
Just because a worker is making money off of tables doesn't mean that the corporation should opt out of paying them decent wage.
Former restaurant worker Carlos Romero. Romero is High Road organizer with the Restaurant Opportunities Centers in Chicago. Chicago community activists, including Stand Up Chicago, the Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago, SEIU, Action Now, and the Grassroots Collaborative this week pushed for a higher minimum wage in the city. The groups are backing a voter referendum on the March 18th ballot calling for a city minimum wage of $15 an hour. Romero says it's time that new models were adopted to end poverty wages for restaurant and other low-wage workers, and that should include paying living wages instead of tipped wages for restaurant workers.
There are multiple business models out there that show higher productivity and higher profit by taking care of their workers and by having a highly involved management style. And we offer that as an organization with Restaurant Opportunity Centers.
We stand today not because we want more money, we want justice today.
It's always the same story, even back when I started, 76. Less men, more coal. That's what they want.
I'm fighting for everyone in my community. I live in the south side of Chicago, and it's rough. We all need to come together. The workers all around the nation.
Support Workers Independent News and keep these worker voices on the air by donating now at laborradio.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, just listening to this commercial won't help them. Just listening won't give them their next meal, or shelter, or hope. You can help by texting GIVE to 777-444 to donate $10, and by going to usaid.gov/FWD to forward the facts. Brought to you by the Ad Council and USAID. Text donations.
Assume that you ran a business that was found guilty of bribery, forgery, perjury, defrauding homeowners, fleecing investors, swindling consumers, cheating credit card holders, violating U.S. trade laws, and bilking American soldiers. Can you even imagine the punishment you'd get? How about 0? No jail time, not even a fine. Plus, you get to stay on as boss. You get to keep all the loot you gain from the crime spree, and you even get a $8.5 million pay raise. Of course, you and I would never get such outrageous, absurd, kid-glove pampering by legal authorities. But then, we're not the capo of J.P. Morgan Chase, America's biggest bank and a crime syndicate that apparently is too big to jail. Jamie Dimon is the slick CEO who has fostered a culture of thievery during his years as a top executive at J.P. Morgan, leading to that shameful litany of crime. Yet, federal prosecutors have bowed to the politically connected Wall Streeter, refusing to ruffle his feathers with even a single criminal charge. Meanwhile, one of the scams that Diamond directly supervised produced a $6 billion loss for shareholders in 2012. And his reign of mismanagement and illegalities cost the bank's shareholders another $20 billion in federal fines last year, resulting in a 16% drop in profits. You might think the bank's board of directors would at least slap Jamie's wrist for the loss of those billions, but no. In January, they rewarded him, raising his pay by some 70% to a sweet $20 million. This is Jim Hightower saying, the New York Times noted that to ordinary Americans, such a reward for a poor performance, quote, may seem curious. Curious? Try incomprehensible, insane, and immoral. Wall Street's haughty elites continue to demonstrate that they're common mobsters, only not so ethical.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act Radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with Carl Frisch.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
This is Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and we are back on Take Action News, and this is the technology segment of the show. The future is here. What was the name of that X-Files show, Fear the Future? We're not going quite that far. I think there's a lot that could be bright and exciting and beautiful and human and humane and moral in the American future. But I also think there are things we need to be concerned about. You know, I was just thinking during this break about an American president and what it means to be president at a time when radical technological change is changing how we work, is changing how we play, is changing how our economy functions, is even in a way changing what it means to be human and living in the world. I'm thinking, of course, of President Andrew Jackson, and I'm thinking of President Taft, and I'm thinking of President Woodrow Wilson, and I'm thinking of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Technological change is not new in human life. Technological change and transformation has been a part of our existence since we crawled out of the mud. You know, the first human being to make a tool, and I'm thinking of the opening to 2001: A Space Odyssey, where a tool becomes a weapon too. The first human being who made a tool, who picked up a stick and dug in the rock, in the dirt and rocks for grubs with it, that human being was a cyborg. That human being was no longer the kind of humanity that had preceded him. He was now a combination, or she, of human and tool. That combination is as old as civilization and older. So as we explore our challenges and our opportunities with technology, let's not kid ourselves, and let's not be kidded by the czars and czarinas of technology, the ones like Tom Perkins of the Silicon Valley, who made such waves this week by his analogy that criticism of the wealthy 1% was like crystal knocked leading to Nazi Germany. The idea, you know, he went on TV and apologized for the choice of that word, probably just apologizing for how it affected his friendships and his lifestyle, but he didn't apologize for the notion that the wealthy technological gurus of this world should be immune from criticism and should be able to use public bus stops for their private buses and drive up rents in San Francisco and insult other human beings and so on without fear of retribution. He didn't apologize for that at all. And by the way, I wrote a piece criticizing Tom Perkins as Many human beings did, many cyborg humans did, and we invited him on this show because one of the things we plan to do here on Take Action News is if we have an argument with you, we're going to invite you on to have a conversation with us about it. So we wrote Tom Perkins and we said, hey, we'd love to have you on the show. We'd love to talk to you since you seem to equate criticism of your ex-wife's hedge, which is something we discovered in the San Francisco architecture column, with Occupy and left-wing criticism of wealth in general. And since you wanted to include the progressive, or rather accuse the progressive left of being guilty of some sort of Kristallnacht-like thinking, we are the people you're criticizing, Tom. So we invited you on. We didn't hear back from you, but that invitation stands. Anytime, any week, you don't want to come on when we tape, we will pre-record. We'll have that conversation with you anytime because I think you need to know the people you're talking about before you say those things about them. But the notion that what they're doing in the Silicon Valley is so magical and mysterious and wonderful and so above anything that's been done before. No, this is just another bunch of people picking up sticks. They are creating. I'm sorry. I went to a conference on mindfulness. I wrote about it. I reported on it, where I literally saw on stage a Zen Buddhist Roshi put on with one of the guys who created Farmville, and being told that both these wisdom traditions have something to teach us. I'm sorry. Farmville is not a wisdom tradition. And a 2,500-year-old spiritual practice cannot be equated, in my mind, with an online game that allows you to trade little pink animals with your friends through Facebook. I'm sorry. I just don't see the comparison. But this is the kind of grandiosity we need to resist, because it's the kind of grandiosity that's being encouraged by our culture. It's the kind of grandiosity which, when combined with their money, is polluting our political process. And as we'll learn in the upcoming hour, it's the kind of grandiosity that leads to the profoundest form of ingratitude, which is the decision to rip off, manipulate, and control the government that made all of it possible, because it's government funding and government research that led to the chips, the microchips, the intel inside and all of that made the Tom Perkinses of the world so wealthy. It's government funding and government design that created the internet, where all these guys are making their money. So don't tell me you're a genius. You're not a genius. You're a guy who's working hard because you want to make money, and some of you are smart and creative, some of you are not, but all of you owe what you've done to public funding, taxpayer inventions, the DARPA, the defense agency which invented the internet, the military applications which led to the creations of so much you do. So it's the highest form of ingratitude to turn around with your government-funded billions and decide now you're a libertarian and a self-made man, and they almost always are men. In fact, I think that they virtually always are. So in this hour, we're going to be talking with Mark Ames about some very illegal salary rigging that seems to have gone on. We'll be talking about net neutrality with Josh Levy from Free Press, which does very, very fine work in that area. And we will be closing off with a story on the NSA and leaky apps. So please stick with us. We have a lot to say in this hour about technology. I have a technology background myself as part of my finance background. We're not intimidated. We don't think you do anything magic. We think you do creative stuff. We think you contribute. But, if you come in and take government funding, as Apple Computer did, and then offshore all your jobs and offshore all your profits after making your fortune off of us, you're going to hear from us here at Take Action News. My name is Richard Eskow. This is Take Action News. We will be back after this break talking about net neutrality. What is it? How do we protect it? And how do we make sure that this government-created resource of the Internet continues to be available freely to all the people? I'm Richard Eskow. Stick with us on Take Action News.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in modifying your home. Free consultations at 2%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-9950 or visit hud.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/Guard Reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the ARC. The ARC is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The ARC is also home to the ARC Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the ARC, so stop by and see them. The ARC, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the ARC's website, www.thearcdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The ARC, part of Southeast D.C. We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org. Or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
I'm Richard Eskow, and we are back on Take Action News. You know, nothing burns me more in the technology field than when I hear a telecom executive saying, "These are my pipes." And it aggravates me for two reasons, and this is on the topic of net neutrality. Number one, because his entire technology platform was created at taxpayer expense. And number two, when I pay you a connect fee, sir, they're my pipes. They're not your pipes. But with that in mind, I want to introduce our next guest, Josh Levy, who is with the fine organization Free Press and leads their work to protect internet freedom, stop government and corporate surveillance, secure public use of the public airwaves, and promote universal access to high-speed internet. Hi, Josh. Thanks for being with us.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Boy, that's a broad mandate. What do you do in your spare time?
Work.
Yeah, I guess so. Listen, you have been hard at work on the net neutrality issue, along with many others, and there was a development on that recently. Which, can you break that down for us in plain English? What happened?
Sure, I'll try. So 2 weeks ago, a federal appeals court in Washington, D.C., threw out the FCC's open internet rules, which were passed at the end of 2010 and were intended to ensure and protect net neutrality, which is the concept that we should be able to access any content that we want on the internet, say anything we want, use any application that we want that connects to the internet without a corporation or government blocking it.
And let me step in right there.
Sure.
So I know, also I see you're talking, I'm not going to ask you to explain everything, but on net neutrality, a lot of people are confused about what it means. And basically when you say that, I think what you're really saying to me is that without net neutrality, we might no longer have an internet where somebody like me, for example, or you, an individual, could create a website and have other people read it freely or easily the way they do today. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Net neutrality is the concept that protects our ability to read whatever website we want and to make whatever website we want. Without it, there's no guarantee that whatever news site that we want to read will be available to us or will load as quickly as some other site. There's no guarantee that the videos we want to watch will load as quickly as we want them to or at all. Or any applications that we want to use will work. It gives, without net neutrality rules, companies like Verizon, Comcast, Time Warner Cable, AT&T, and others can block any of those things, and there is no legal ramification for it whatsoever.
So I could pay my phone fee, I could pay my access fee, whatever it might be, my data connect fee, and then suddenly find that I can no longer go to websites I've been visiting regularly because, for example, the corporation wanted a huge sum for access to me. So while I'm paying on my end, they're also making the other guys pay on the other end for the chance to access me. And as a result, it's not really the internet as we know it anymore. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. And so what we were saying 2 weeks ago when this happened was that the internet as we've come to know it might be gone. And maybe you will be able to access those websites, but maybe it'll cost you a little bit more money. Maybe that money will flow from those costs will flow down from the services you subscribe to. So let's say you're a Netflix subscriber, but now they're being forced to pay a little bit extra to reach you. So maybe your subscription costs are going to go up. Maybe your internet service provider like Comcast is going to charge you a little bit more to access certain sites because they've cut a deal. So $5 extra a month for Facebook or $5 extra a month for Google. Those things are all within the realm of the possible, and there are a lot of other things that will be less perceptible that will be going on, probably are already going on, that will lead to, in 5 to 10 years, we'll realize that the internet, as we know it then, is a lot different than it used to be.
Well, leaving aside the fact that I'd pay $5 not to have Facebook, the real question is, this really, once I connected with this issue, it really made me mad. Because I'm thinking, I paid the taxes that created the internet. People like us create the content that makes all of us, whether we're Facebook, whether we're bloggers or website developers or just people who use social media, the public created the content that made the internet valuable, and now they want to restrict our access and pick our pockets more for it, and it just fries me. And what happened 2 weeks ago was apparently the Bush FCC, correct me on any of this if I'm wrong, the Bush FCC decided that it was going to regulate the internet as if it was not a something and as if it was a something else, and that's what led to this problem. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so about 12 years ago, there was actually a decision made by the Bush-era FCC Chairman Michael Powell to deregulate the FCC's authority over the internet. And what that means is that previous to that, the FCC had the ability to enforce net neutrality-like rules. It had the ability to stop broadband providers from discriminating against users and against content. And what Powell did in 2002 is he actually switched that around, and he classified broadband services in a different way, which gave the FCC a lot less authority over that and removed its ability to protect internet users. And so we've been living with the ramifications ramifications of that decision ever since. And in the late 2000s, we started to see a lot of abuses from providers like Comcast, which blocked BitTorrent, which is an internet service, purely because it wanted to, and it was sued by the FCC, and the FCC lost that case because it did not have the proper authority to stop Comcast from doing such a thing, and that's what led to the passage of these 2010 open internet rules that were just thrown out. But those rules were also passed in a way that didn't give the FCC the appropriate authority, and without that authority, without classifying broadband in the appropriate way, the FCC simply can't stop these service providers from abusing internet users and the internet itself.
Well, why don't they just change it? Can't they just say, well, we were classifying you as this kind of provider, but in reality we see now that 12 years is a long time in the technology world. Reality, we see now that you're this other kind of provider, so we're reclassifying you and cut out the funny stuff?
They could do that today if they wanted to. Unfortunately, this has become a political issue, and telecom lobbyists have funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to lobbyists in Washington to convince the FCC that it can't take that step, that step would somehow be a problem for the companies. And so the FCC has heard that message, and it's been reluctant to make this move and take the step to reclassify broadband. Meanwhile, the public and internet users around the country have gotten angrier and angrier as these abuses have taken place. And so it's gotten to this point where we just yesterday delivered 1 million petitions to the FCC urging it to reclassify broadband as a communications service and then to pass strong, long-lasting net neutrality rules. So they definitely heard that. In fact, FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler said in comments after the delivery that 1 million petition signatures, that's BOFO. And then we had to look up on the Internet what BOFO means.
Yeah, if you were my age, you'd know what BOFO means. I mean, I'm just assuming you're not, because BOFO is what they use. It's like showbiz. It's like doing great box office. But, yeah, okay, and all right, yes, it would hurt the companies. Well, yeah. I mean, are these companies in need of financial support? Are they struggling for survival? Or why are they asking for special government dispensation? What's their rationale for that? Are they not making money? Are they going under? Do we need to nationalize them?
They're doing great. They're making tons of money, and in fact, some years, companies like Verizon and Comcast and others, they actually pay negative taxes sometimes, which means that they get more in government subsidies than they pay out in taxes. And so they're doing just fine, but just fine is never enough for them. They want to continue to nickel and dime us as much as they possibly and legally can, and that's why Verizon, in its oral arguments in this case before it was decided, it laid out its entire plan for what it wants to do. It wants to treat the Internet like a newspaper. It thinks it should be able to be the editor of that newspaper and place certain content higher than other forms of content and charge us extra for certain pieces of it.
That's what America Online tried to do in 1995, and people hated it. So we know. So, and by the way, this whole negative income tax thing. Do you think I can get a negative subscriber fee? You think maybe they would pay me 1 month for subscribing? So what can people do? I'm obviously being flippant with that, but what can people do? Where can they go to find out more about what you're doing, and where can they go to maybe sign the next petition or add their name to this one, or in some other way stay on the case with this one?
The best thing people can do is go to SaveTheInternet.com. It's our campaign site where you have all the information you would need to learn more about this reclassification idea that we've been talking about. You can take action to tell the FCC to reclassify broadband and to pass strong net neutrality rules, and you can learn how to share all of this stuff with your friends. And so I would urge everybody to go to SaveTheInternet.com to learn as much as they can about this issue.
Okay, and where can they learn more about Free Press and what you guys do? Is it freepress.org, or what's it called?
Freepress.net, and you'll learn a lot about not only this net neutrality issue, but also our work on stopping mass surveillance, on stopping media consolidation, on promoting press freedom, and other issues.
Well, we're all about that. So, I got to say, I'm not one of those angry radio guys, but this issue really ticks me off because of the hubris and presumption of the corporations and the people doing it. So, Josh Levy, keep up the great work, you and all the folks at Free Press and all the people at SaveTheInternet.com, and thanks so much for being with us.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay, in the upcoming half hour, really, folks, and I do want to say this, go to his website, go to SaveTheInternet.com, go to Free Press, find out more about what they're doing. One day we're going to wake up and this Internet which is the best thing technology has given us in a while in terms of communication, in terms of, it spies on us, but it also has great upside potential. We'll lose that upside potential. One day we'll wake up and find it gone. So please take a look at that. And in our next half hour, we're going to hear from Mark Ames, who will tell us about, I don't know if it's the Tech-Topus or the Tech-Topus, but he's going to tell us about some pretty outrageous things that have been going on with hiring practices in the Silicon Valley, which is just more evidence that we can't let our technology manage us. We manage it. I'm R.J. Eskow, Richard Eskow, and you are listening to Take Action News. Stick with us.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Action News. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow. Our next guest is Mark Ames. Mark is the founding editor of the satirical Moscow biweekly, The Exile, and that's spelled all lowercase except for the X, as if E. Cummings joined the Nation of Islam. The Exile. And he's also the author of Going Postal, which is a fascinating book, and co-author of The Exile, Sex, Drugs, and Libel in the New Russia. I suspect libel is the dangerous one of the three. Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on. I should also add I'm senior editor now at Pando Daily, which is where the recent piece that I guess we're going to discuss about the wage theft.
It is, and I'm sorry for leaving that out. It's pando.com.
That's right.
Okay, yes, absolutely, and that is the piece we're going to discuss. It's about something you call the tectopus or the tectopus. I think it's tectopus, but basically the gist of it, in your article, you say that as demand for Silicon Valley engineers began booming, Apple's Steve Jobs sealed a secret and illegal pact with Google's Eric Schmidt to artificially push their workers' wages lower, and you describe it also as a secret wage theft agreement. That's pretty strong stuff, Mark. You got this from court documents. Tell us about this story a little bit.
Well, yeah, not just court documents, but also the Department of Justice and its civil suit against Apple, Google, Intel, Intuit, Adobe, Lucasfilm, Pixar, and a separate one against eBay as well. And it describes this secret illegal wage theft pact as a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act. Basically, wages, after there was first the crash in 2000, of course, in technology, and then it started to really boom again by 2004, 2005. It's going through the roof, and that started pushing demand for engineers and other workers, started pushing wages up pretty rapidly. And so at that time, according to this class action lawsuit that was just finally certified given class action certification, and it's going to trial. At this time, Steve Jobs, who already had been introduced to this idea of a secret wage suppression, wage theft pact through his relationship with George Lucas at Lucasfilm, of all people, so he turns out to be the Obi-Wan Kenobi of this whole thing. Basically what it is these guys agree secretly not to recruit each other's employees and also to share wage level information, so different families of jobs, what their bands are, so that they can sort of coordinate each other's, wage scales. And this is obviously, it's illegal, among other things. And so Jobs, as the market started heating up in early 2005, he sends a message through board members that all these big tech companies share, sending Bill Campbell, who was a board member at Apple and the consigliere, the senior advisor to Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, and says, if you're going to recruit my guys, it's war. And Google had just had its IPO, and they were just starting to boom, but they were still young. And they immediately backed off and said, what do you want to do? And Jobs said, we're going to agree not to go after any of each other's employees and fire any recruiter, anybody who so much as makes a single cold call. And so they agreed, and from there, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So what happens, like, let's say I'm an engineer at Google, and I apply at Apple, or vice versa, during this time period, they just basically can my application and ignore me as if I didn't exist? Because
no, it's even worse. They agreed to notify HR on the other side, and oftentimes that went right up to the CEO. Hey, so-and-so actually is looking for the job, so your boss then finds out.
So I don't get the job, and maybe I get fired too.
Maybe, yeah. But what's even, and on top of it, though, the way that they explain it, people didn't quite intuitively understand how this works. If you ban cold calling and recruiting and so on, in the recruitment world, and these kind of white-collar jobs, it's considered that the best people, the best talent, is the talent that's not actively necessarily looking for a job. And right. So, and this comes out of the company documents and their conversations. that to be able to cold call engineers and tech people, that's where you actually really find the best talent. And then what happens is these guys who aren't actually actively looking start to learn information about what they might be worth, because obviously you're going to be offered a better deal most likely if they really want you. Then you start to learn what you actually are worth, and then you start spreading that information to other people in your job family, and they start to learn as well what they might be worth. And that's
what you're describing, Mark. I'm sorry to cut in, but what you're describing, besides being extremely illegal from the sound of it, what you're just, these guys are always lecturing us about the free market. But what you're sounding like, among other things, is that they're completely subverting the market process when it comes to jobs and hiring by manipulating it with secret information sharing and suppression of information from, transactors in the market. So while they're out there lecturing us about free trade and the power of markets, they're rigging the job market. Am I wrong?
No, that's exactly right. And it's why this kind of clunky title, I guess, the Techtopus, I was kind of trying to make a reference back to the octopus, which is what they, like Frank Norris, and people were starting to understand what the railroads were doing in the late 19th century, how they operated. Interlocking boards of directors, a whole bunch of public cants about, free markets and everybody's being liberated while privately, working to undermine the laborers' rights and fixing markets, fixing labor markets, fixing wages, fixing prices that they charge to the farmers to bring their stuff to market. Like, that's how these guys operate. Publicly, they tell you a lie. Privately, they try and fix everything like a monopoly or a cartel.
So now, what is the deal with this? This is a great story, and I'm really glad you're on it. What is the deal with the current state of the lawsuit and/or any other legal actions?
Right. So these companies, except for the eBay suit, which is separate but related, these other companies settled with the Department of Justice, and that became the basis then for the lawsuits filed by software engineers who had their wages suppressed, effectively stolen. Through this agreement, they filed this lawsuit in 2012, and then the companies have been fighting back, trying to deny them class action, all kinds of ruses, dragging out some University of Chicago Milton Friedman economist to say, that even if they had a secret agreement, it still didn't hurt competition, and they fought this all the way, and finally they just lost a couple of weeks ago. They lost their battle to have class action decertified. So it is certified, and the judge said this, that at least 100,000 workers are affected by this particular case. It's set to go to trial in May in the San Jose District Court. I'm still pouring some more documents. I want to get more out of this and understand better how these guys actually talk to each other and how they talk to each other about the rest of us. But I'm afraid...
I want you to do that, and I want you also to keep digging. You mentioned, we're going to have to wrap shortly, but you mentioned Adobe and how a smaller company was rolled by some of the bigger companies and all of this. So I think, it seems to me there might be some antitrust angles in this too, and I assume as we wrap up that could also wind up being a dimension of this story.
Well, this whole thing is essentially an antitrust issue, but concerning workers, as well as the power of large corporations to force large but not as large corporations to bend to their will. And in fact, I'm glad you pointed that out. In the next piece I'll write about this, there was one CEO who told Jobs, "No, this is illegal. I'm not going to do this." He was the CEO of Palm. And Jobs wrote back and said, if you don't go along with this, we will initiate patent infringement lawsuits against you and destroy you. You understand the difference in power between Apple and Palm? And the guy said, basically, screw you. I'm not going along with this. And Palm doesn't exist anymore.
Well, that just shows what a wonderful Buddhist CEO Steve Jobs was. Listen, this is a great story, Mark. please stay on it, and we'll be following you. And by the way, I'm writing a horror movie called Tectopus versus Snuffleupagus, and I might cut you in for a few points. Thanks so much for being with us. Mark, I hope you come back and talk to us again. All right.
Good.
You bet. This is Take Action News. I'm Richard Eskow, and we will be back after these messages.
Education beyond high school, a path to opportunity and success for our young people, and the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream, because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Marins, and I'm here to talk to you about Take Action News with David Schuster. Every week we talk politics, government, and what you can do to take action. David Schuster talks with today's leading political minds.
Valerie, so many people will know your name, know your story because of those dastardly actions by the Bush administration to try to discredit your husband, who called them out for their lies that led up to the Iraq War. And in so going after him, they leaked your name. 10 years since the start of the Iraq War. Has your perspective on any of this changed? Do you still carry around any sort of anger or frustration to the Bush administration? How have you been dealing with it all these years?
Until the right is able to come to terms with the reality that we were lied into this war and it was not a good idea and it wasn't to liberate the Iraqi people, they will just continue to live in, la-la land and to perpetuate the lies that got us into the war in the first place.
Tune in from noon to 3 p.m. every Saturday, right here on We Act Radio.
When our daughter Ava was 4, we noticed she didn't talk much. A genetic test revealed that she had hearing loss caused by 2 mutated genes. One she inherited from myself, the other from her dad. If it weren't for the amazing people at U of M, we might have never known the true cause of Ava's hearing loss or how to properly treat it.
The University of Michigan C.S. Mott Children's Hospital is one of only a handful of hospitals in the world researching genetic hearing loss in addition to treating it. Our breakthrough research and advanced treatments combined with outstanding care help us change children's lives in extraordinary ways. For the leaders and best in pediatric care, call a Mott Patient Advisor at 877-475-MOTT or visit mottchildren.org.
She is more talkative now and more social. She loves music now. She's humming to the music, and it's sweet to actually hear her humming.
To learn more, call 877-475-MOTT.
They not only helped us find answers, they helped Ava find her voice.
That's the Michigan difference.
And we are back on Take Action News. This is RJ Eskow. Our next guest, this is our technology hour of the show, our future hour of the show. And our next guest is Jeff Larson. Jeff is the data editor of ProPublica, which that organization, ProPublica, does a lot of terrific reporting. Jeff himself does fine reporting, and in fact, he's won the Livingston Award. Jeff has just done a story on the NSA and new revelations. He's done. I think the story was done in conjunction with the New York Times and the Guardian in Britain. That says that Angry Birds and other smartphone apps are accessible to secret agencies, spying agencies. In fact, it begins when a smartphone user opens Angry Birds, the popular game application, and it describes what it does. Spy agencies have plotted how to lurk in the background to snatch data revealing the player's location, age, sex, and other personal information. And as we learn in this story, it gets worse. And to add insult to injury, the story even shows an illustration from a top secret document which shows a sort of fairy, flying around and with his magic wand, I guess, opening up data through these apps or something. I don't know. It's banality of espionage evil, I guess. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us on Take Action News.
Thanks for having me.
Did I absolutely maul the content of your story, or was I on the right track?
You were on the right track. I mean, both Britain's GCHQ, which is their version of the NSA, and the NSA, like smartphones as intelligence devices, because these smartphones leak personal information, not just through Angry Birds, but through other applications. And they call these smartphone applications leaky apps. And they're really, really interested in scooping up data that travels over the internet and private cell phone networks from these leaky apps about their targets.
And what's their legal justification for this? Are they saying because it's being transmitted through the air that they have a right to grab it, or is this something else that's of questionable legality or clear illegality? Where does that side of it stand?
Well, we asked the NSA about that, and they said that we asked both agencies about that, and the NSA came back to us saying that they don't profile everyday Americans when it carries out its foreign intelligence mission. They are legally required to minimize Americans' data, but they do admit that there is some incidental collection of Americans' data through these programs. They also have protections for innocent foreign citizens. The British, the GCHQ went a little bit further and said that all of these activities are, compliant under British law.
So when you heard that NSA answer, did you experience a certain sense of deja vu? Because it seems to resemble the answers they initially gave about their phone and email spying programs as well, which turned out not to be precisely true.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of their stock answer for stories. They gave it to us. They gave us that answer. Or something close, similar to that answer when we reported on the Snowden docs last time about their spying on internet video games with World of Warcraft and Second Life. The story that we did before that about encryption, they actually went a step further and asked us not to publish that story about their capabilities against strong encryption on the internet.
Interesting. Now, on this one, obviously, you guys used Angry Birds because, it's attention-getting and all that. But how many apps do we think may have been or are vulnerable to being accessed in this way?
Well, it depends, right? Because, because technology changes, and apps change, so it's hard to tell in the current... like right now exactly what they're doing, but we have found going as far back from 2008 that they were tapping things like Google Maps. We found in 2000, over the course from 2008 to around 2012, that they were looking at apps like, Twitter, Facebook, Flickr. They were, tracking images. When people upload images, they were trying to extract data from that. But what's really interesting about the Angry Birds document is it's not just the apps that you know you're running, like Angry Birds. It's also the advertising companies that you don't know are on your phone that are transmitting this sort of personal data over the internet.
Well, and I noticed that you talked about Millennial being one of the ad companies that they access, which has much more detailed, appears to have much more detailed personal information there. You include some lines of code, which, if you can read at all, make sense of code. Marital status, null. Marital status, single. Marital status, divorced. Engaged, relationship. Swinger. That one is bound to catch a little bit of attention. So are you saying that with this program, the NSA can potentially know if people are single, divorced, or swinging, as they say?
Sure, yes. It's clear. We have to pause for a second and point out that this was just a study of the things that they could grab from millennial media, not necessarily that they were. We do know that in Google's case, they are using, they are able to read the information or have been in the past able to read the information in Google advertisements. But again, right, it's 2012 when we asked them about whether or not they put it into place. They gave us that stock language answer back. So,
well, let me take a brief left field, what may seem like a left field digression for you. Last week, the Ukrainian government used geolocation data to do a mass broadcast to people in the area of a demonstration that said, you have been registered, dear subscriber, you have been registered as participating, I can't remember what the word was, in a civil disobedience, a civil disturbance or something along those lines. Did they use something similar to do that, maybe Google Maps data, or is that in no way connected with your program or that you wrote about, or how do those two stories tie together, or don't they?
So this story that we wrote that we wrote and published on Monday goes hand in hand with a story that the Washington Post published last year about a program called Code Traveler. So there are many ways that the intelligence agencies can scoop up location data. One of the ways that we wrote about on Monday is the location data that is leaked by leaky apps. So all of these apps contain, broadcast your location onto the internet, and oftentimes when it comes to advertising companies, they broadcast it in the clear. The Washington Post story from last year talked about cell phone tower IDs. Now, and this is just the theory. In the Ukraine case, I think what they did is they got the number of everybody connected to a particular cell phone tower and sent them all, the text message. But that's a theory. They do track over these private cell phone networks. They have the capability to track which cell phone tower you're connected to, and by extension, where you are in the world. And there's a line in our story about that.
So now, thank you for answering that. And you guys concentrated on Angry Birds, presumably as a case study. But do we know what percentage of apps? I know there were 100,000 apps in the Apple Store, and a similar or larger amount now on Android. Do we know what percentage in the minute or so we have left, what percentage of apps are rightfully considered leaky?
We unfortunately they didn't give a number that we had, but we do know that the NSA in 2007, the year that the iPhone came out, upped their budget, their wireless budget, and their mobile phone budget from $204 million to over $700 million. And I think that points to that this is a very important thing for the agency.
All right. Well, this is a terrific story, and I assume you're staying on it. Where can people go to read the rest of your work?
You can go to ProPublica.org. We're a nonprofit news organization in New York City.
Great. Jeff Larson, data editor with ProPublica, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
I'm Richard Eskow, and you are listening to Take Action News. We will be back after these messages.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune into the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
You're elderly, disabled, or poor, and you think you have the right to vote? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania successfully spearheaded an effort to enact the so-called voter identification law, a law that requires every voter to present a state-issued identification card at the polling place before they can vote. The law's supporters claim that the law will combat the voter fraud of a person coming to the polls and claiming to be somebody else. The problem with this claim? It's imaginary. No proponent of the law could even point to a single incident when anything like this actually ever had occurred. But the law has serious consequences. Free photo IDs have not been made available, and so the law effectively disenfranchises a significant percentage of the elderly, disabled, and low-income citizens who, no surprise to the Republican legislature, tend to vote Democratic. Voter suppression is the unspoken but actual intent of this law, and sadly, the United States Supreme Court seems to have no problem with voter suppression laws. But, fortunately, a Pennsylvania trial court recently has ruled that the state voter ID law violates the state constitutional guarantee of a democracy. The case now heads to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which will be the final arbiter of whether in that state the right to vote means all adult citizens actually have that right, or not. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown. Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty. Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Illinois AFL-CIO President Mike Kerrigan says the lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of billions of dollars in pension cuts for Illinois public workers came only after years of efforts to negotiate a solution to the unfunded pension obligations. He says the unconstitutional theft of these earned contractually promised benefits is unacceptable.
Some of my quote use that word exactly, pension theft. So we're going to court, and we're confident this public act will be overturned.
Kerrigan says pension payments should have equal high priority to bond obligations, so workers who put in decades of work earning those pensions won't be shortchanged.
Pension payments need to have a high priority in terms of those kind of things get paid first before we have other discussions about spending money on other programs. This is an obligation as a result of contract negotiations, and they need to be honored.
Walmart workers sent an open letter to the new Walmart CEO urging him to work with Our Walmart to improve working conditions and wages for Walmart workers. They said in the letter that low pay, inadequate hours, and unpredictable scheduling isn't good for workers or for the business. And they wrote the new CEO about Barbara Collins, an 8-year employee of Walmart who was fired for speaking out about wages and working conditions. Collins had to visit 3 different food banks in 1 month to feed her family. The workers appealed to new CEO Doug McMillan to be responsive to efforts by workers to get Walmart to treat workers better.
Just because a worker is making money off of tables doesn't mean that the corporation should opt out of paying them decent wage.
Former restaurant worker Carlos Romero. Romero is High Road organizer with the Restaurant Opportunities Centers in Chicago. Chicago community activists, including Stand Up Chicago, the Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago, SEIU, Action Now, and the Grassroots Collaborative this week pushed for a higher minimum wage in the city. The groups are backing a voter referendum on the March 18th ballot calling for a city minimum wage of $15 an hour. Romero says it's time that new models were adopted to end poverty wages for restaurant and other low-wage workers, and that should include paying living wages instead of tipped wages for restaurant workers.
There are multiple business models out there that show higher productivity and higher profit by taking care of their workers and by having a highly involved management style. And we offer that as an organization with Restaurant Opportunity Centers.
We stand today not because we want more money, we want justice today.
It's always the same story, even back when I started, 76. Less men, more coal. That's what they want.
I'm fighting for everyone in my community. I live in the south side of Chicago, and it's rough. We all need to come together. The workers all around the nation.
Support Workers Independent News and keep these worker voices on the air by donating now at laborradio.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
This is the Media Matters Minute, and I'm John Kerr. According to the Department of Commerce, the economy grew at an annual rate of 3.2% in the fourth quarter of 2013. On Fox News' America's Newsroom, Charles Payne claimed that the government shutdown, which occurred in the fourth quarter of 2013, helped spur economic growth.
Our economy has gotten so much traction since the government shutdown, which the mass media has said is an evil, awful thing, and it hurt us. Well, during that period, more jobs were created. During that period, the stock market was up, and we continue to see, as government gets out of the way, the private sector comes in.
Payne is completely incorrect. According to MSNBC's Steve Bannon, the economy could have grown even more without the government shutdown. In addition, Jason Furman of the Council of Economic Advisors claimed the shutdown reduced private sector employment in October by 120,000 jobs. But Payne's comments come as little surprise, as this is just the latest in Fox's campaign to downplay any and all negative effects of the GOP-led shutdown. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Study war no more. Sing it with me, brother. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Yeah.
And we're back on Take Action News. So picture this. You were listening to Pete Seeger with Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. Picture this. You're 14 years old. You love music. You want to learn the guitar and other instruments. You live in the New York City area, and on a local radio station, I think it was a New Jersey station, there's a black and white TV show called Rainbow Quest, where Pete Seeger, who's a folk singer, and you admire him as a lefty, you admire him as a folk singer, but he is your parents' age, remember? Let's not forget that. Pete comes on with this TV show every week, and he has people like legends, people who, I mean, they could be out of the Tales of King Arthur as far as you're concerned, like Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, coming on the show and sitting down with him and talking. That was the experience I had growing up in New York City, where Pete Seeger was both a hero and a challenge for guys like me. He was a hero because he was Pete Seeger. He was a challenge because it was the days of rock and roll and revolution. And, you know, rock and roll and revolution were not things that tied together all that nicely with people of your parents' age. So, you know, I wrote a piece about Pete, who, as most of you know, or all of you know, passed away this week at the age of 94. I loved him. I didn't know. I encountered him, but I didn't know him. Pete was an extraordinary human being, but I struggled, young. How could I rebel when the music was being played by such a wholesome, happy, cheerful individual? If there had been goths when I was 14, I would have been a goth. How can you reconcile that with a guy like Pete Seeger? And I'll tell you, here's how. Because Pete was so relentlessly optimistic, so relentlessly positive, so relentlessly fair and just and humane that he was a force that couldn't be denied. I wrote a piece where I interviewed my friend Happy Traum. Now, Happy goes all the way back in the folk music movement he says he met Pete in 1956 when Happy himself was in high school. And that Pete was generous and open and kind to him then. And Happy told me a couple things that really opened my eyes. And by the way, Happy himself is a legend. You can find his work and his publishing on homespun.com. But Happy, for example, played on the first recording of Blowin' in the Wind, which was done for Sing Out or one of those magazines with Bob Dylan in 1962. He was there. And he said, among other things, he published Pete's instructional book and so on. He said that Pete was an educator as much as he was a performer. And it's true. Pete wanted to teach with everything he did, whether it was creating a demonstration, whether it was sailing a boat up and down the Hudson River to illustrate the fact that that river needed to be clean, and stopping in all the towns along the way to sing and have concerts. He stopped in Nyack, near where I lived, and we all came out and we helped out with the setup and so on. He was an educator. He was a musician, a superb musician, a superb popularizer of music, a superb songwriter. If I Had a Hammer and Where Have All the Flowers Gone and all those immortal songs. And, when I became more of a musician myself, I still had this sense of embarrassment. If I Had a Hammer, Where Have All the Flowers Gone, they're so wholesome, they're so well-intentioned. I wanted to be edgy. But I'll tell you when my feelings about If I Had a Hammer changed. I'm sorry, about Where Have All the Flowers Gone. It changed, first of all, when I was playing some music for some Vietnamese refugees who didn't have a place to stay and didn't know English very well. But that was one song they knew and one song they wanted to hear. And I'll tell you, to sing that song to that audience makes you realize the timelessness and the power and the beauty of the music that, sometimes we reject our legacy because it embarrasses us when we're young, and we embrace it with maturity. The other time I sang it, by the way, was just a few years ago. I think they're the only two times I've sung it. Maybe about 5 years ago, I performed at a political fundraiser in Santa Barbara, California. I was the opening act for General Wesley Clark. And so I got on with my guitar, and usually I like to have a band with me because Bob Dylan said, one man with a guitar entertaining a crowd is like one person taking on an army. Well, I'm not usually that brave, but I did it in this case. And General Clark asked me to sing that song as well. So I did, and then he came up and gave an impromptu 20-minute speech that was basically based on Pete's song. So a man who spends his life perfecting the art of war can also understand the call to peace. And in fact, General Clark told me afterwards that he used to go hear Peter, Paul, and Mary sing that when he was a student at West Point. So, the University of Music can't be denied. And that was what Pete Seeger was all about. As Happy also told me, he said even singing a lullaby for Pete Seeger was a political act. And what he meant by that was that it was organizing an audience for the music. It was creating the singers and folk musicians and folk music lovers of the future. It was creating a base for the values that this kind of music represented at its best moments. And that was Pete Seeger's mission. That was his life. That was his accomplishment. And if you can touch Vietnamese refugees and a five-star general and all the people in between when you're doing it, you've accomplished something wonderful. Pete was also a wonderful archivist of music. He brought together, for example, the poems of the Cuban revolutionary hero Jose Marti, and revolutionary going back more than 100 years, with a popular Cuban hit song of the late 1920s called Guantanamero, which means woman of Guantanamo, ironically enough. and made a hit out of that. And I'll close with this. So when I was about 21, I was traveling through Mexico with a guitar and a friend, but the friend disappeared, so I was walking around with a guitar, and some kids gestured for me to follow them. I climbed up a hillside. There was a church at the top. The sun was setting, long shadows on the cobblestones, and from the church I heard a choir of children singing Pete Seeger's version of Guantanamera. So, Happy Traum said to me, well, I guess Pete's job is over after we learned that Pete died. But, if you're a folk singer, your job is never over. So the theme of this hour will be the causes that Pete Seeger loved: Native Americans, coal miners, and justice. But we're going to start when we come right back with the other side of the equation, the big bosses, the Koch brothers, and a story about that. So please stick with us. We'll be right back on Take Action News. I'm RJ Eskow. Stick with us.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
When you go on a road trip, you're careful. You follow the signs to arrive at the right place. It's the same online. Read the internet signs along the way, or you may be led astray. For example, look for the .gov at the end of the web address. If it isn't .gov, it isn't the real Social Security website. People are often victimized by misleading advertisers who use terms like Social Security or Medicare to trick the public. These companies charge a fee for free Social Security services. These services include changing your name and getting a new Social Security card. There's no need to pay for services Social Security offers for free. Go to www.socialsecurity.gov. And remember, if it isn't .gov, it isn't Social Security.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on healthcare while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
And we are back on Take Action News. I'm Richard Eskow, and our next guest is going to talk to us about a terrific piece of work he's done on the Koch brothers and what he calls Koch. I believe that's his naming of it, the Koch World 2014. Kenneth P. Vogel writes for Politico on the confluence of money, politics, and influence, which means he writes about the political reality, if you ask me, and he's covered politics and government at all levels, from small-time cop chops and school boards to state houses on up to presidential races. Ken, thanks so much for being with us. Do we have Ken? All right, we don't have Ken. Well, all right. Listen, let's talk more about the story. Ken's story in Politico says some very provocative and interesting things, which I was going to read anyway. So while we're getting him on the line, I will read them to you just to give you a context. Ken, remember, Politico is not some lefty agitated. This is a news operation. A neutral news operation in every sense of the word, and certainly not in the pocket of our camp, the Pete Seeger camp. And Ken writes this. Ken's a great reporter, and he writes the following. The Koch political operation has become among the most dominant forces in American politics, rivaling even the official Republican Party in its ability to shape policy debates and elections. Think about that for a second. Rivaling even the official Republican Party in its ability to shape policy debates and elections. This is two brothers who inherited a company. But it's mostly taking a piecemeal approach, writes Ken Vogel, up to now, sticking to its sweet spots while leaving other tasks to outsiders or ad hoc coalitions. Later, Ken writes, that's changing. This year, the Koch's close allies are rolling out a new, more integrated approach to politics. All right, we are back from the depths of hyperspace where we were plunged as a result of some technical problems. So thanks so much for being with us, and I hope that wasn't an inconvenience for you. As I was telling the audience before something so rudely interrupted us, you have written a terrific piece on, I believe your nomenclature is Koch World 2014, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We try to take a look at the sort of broad universe of the Koch brothers' political operation, which is sometimes opaque and difficult to piece together, not just the component parts, but the plans. And what we found, to the extent that we were able to penetrate this sometimes mysterious world, is that they have rather ambitious plans for 2014 and beyond, and we're not necessarily discouraged by the rather poor return on investments from their unprecedented history setting $400 million investment in trying to sway the 2012 election.
Well, no, as a matter of fact, what you described sounds very much like a more centralized and even more hierarchical organization. What you wrote was that they took a piecemeal approach, but that's changing, and now they've decided to create a centralized control of their network. So what does this really mean? I mean, do we have any, I know you're having trouble, they're not exactly being forthcoming about this, but it sounds like they've created, you described the Center for Shared Services, where they can provide staffing, support, Freedom Partners, which doled out $236 million in 2012, a strategic political consulting firm. What are we looking at here? What are the implications? Are we talking, you described this as an operation which rivals the Republican Party, National Republican Party in influence. What did you mean by that exactly?
Well, I mean that their ability to shape the debate over issues, they not just the Koch brothers and their operatives, but all the various universe of groups that get funding through this network, Americans for Prosperity, American Energy Alliance, 60 Plus. I mean, there are groups that aren't just dealing with the sort of core issues that have in the past animated the Koch brothers' political involvement, that is, fiscal restraint, small government, low taxation, free enterprise, but rather a wealth of other issues that we think of as traditionally conservative, including faith-based issues, the National Rifle Association Second Amendment issues, are receiving money from this vast network that is now able to influence public policy debates. You don't have to look too far to find an example of the National Rifle Association influencing public policy debates and killing the rather modest gun control measures that were proposed in the wake of the Newtown school shooting. But beyond the public policy debate, really influence the electoral process. So get to a real say in tapping the folks who will run for the offices that they will then seek to influence. And the most significant development, the most significant change in all this that I detected was a willingness and a desire and a mechanism to play for the first time in Republican primary in a real overt way. That is, it wasn't just enough for them to sort of get behind the Republican candidate in some of these general elections, but they want more of a say in who gets to carry the Republican banner into general elections, and I think that's where you see the most potential impact. It sort of plays right into this tug of war that's going on in the Republican Party and the conservative movement more generally over the direction that Republicans should take. Should they be sort of more of a centrist party of business, the John Boehner Republican Party, or should they be more of a Tea Party, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee party that is unwilling to compromise on issues like funding the government, for instance? The Koch brothers, I think, and the group that they are and their donors are seeding to get involved in primaries would probably take the latter approach, the Tea Party approach, and so that could have really far-reaching impact, not just in our elections, but in our governance.
So we're talking with Kenneth P. Vogel of Politico about his great reporting on the Koch brothers' political machine. So I listen to you, and I hear a couple things. One is I sense that a couple of business guys looked at what did and didn't work in the last election and decided that what they needed was more control over the process, so that some of the freelancers who came in on issues they hadn't traditionally been interested in were maybe spoiling their game plan, so they were going to step in and take over those issues too. And that, but I also, we can only speculate whether that's right or not, but I also hear you saying that unlike perhaps the business interests of the past who might have steered the party toward the center, that the Koch brothers are really aligning themselves as they create this more hierarchical operation with more of the Tea Party far-right Republicans. Is that right? Am I reading you correctly?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly been the tenor and the tone of some of their past involvement. I mean, it's interesting because some of the groups that they've supported and some of the candidates that have been supported by those groups have tended to be sort of more on the fringe, the fiscal conservative fringe of things. And certainly, the Americans for Prosperity, for one, was very involved in the strategy that led to the shutdown and has been a leading, certainly when it's measured just by the amount of money spent, opponent of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. That said, it's interesting because the Koch brothers themselves and Koch Industries, their enormous industrial conglomerate that they are the majority owners of, kind of got leery when and a little bit skittish when the shutdown strategy was linked back to them through Americans for Prosperity. They said, well, we do think that the government is engaging in reckless spending, and we do oppose Obamacare, but we don't support shutting down the government as a tactic and a strategy to address Obamacare. And there's a little bit of a disconnect there. We're thinking like, well, the group that you funded, that's really your biggest political vehicle, did in fact do just that. So, I think that it's not entirely predetermined, the direction that they will take. And certainly there are indications that it will be sort of more of the Tea Party direction. But then there is also a bit of skittishness, as I called it before, about being too closely associated with it. So now that there is a real effort to play in these primaries, I think we will see them sort of forced to come to grips to some extent, or their operation forced to come to grips to some extent with this disconnect and figure out what it is, which direction exactly they would like the Republican Party to go in.
Well, you're describing a disconnect. Let me pose a hypothetical hypothetical to you and tell me what you think. I come out of the corporate world, and I worked for, among other places, AIG, which had hundreds of subsidiaries. And when you're running a corporation and you see that some of your operations are freelancing, as we would say, doing things that you didn't really care for, that really didn't fit your corporate mission, you go in there and you start thinking, well, I'm going to manage this a little differently. I'm going to get tighter control on my CEOs and second-level management in these organizations, because not because you change your own line of business or your own corporate mission statement, but because you got some freelance executives who aren't exactly towing the line here. Could that be what's going on? Not so much that they're not the kind of far-right guys we think they are, but that they had some guys who weren't executing the game plan, and that's why they're getting involved in primaries. That's why they're taking on a more hands approach to some of these collateral issues?
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that, and it's not just that they were uncomfortable with the direction that some of these entities and some of the groups that receive money through their network were taking, but also the actual tactics that they didn't feel as if it was a great use of their money. And let's not forget, when we talk about the Koch brothers and the Koch brothers' vast network and the spending of $400 million in 2012, we're not just talking about Charles and David Koch. We're talking about all the donors who they bring together to attend these seminars, as they call them, twice a year, who give money into this pool that is then administered by these nonprofit, we call them banks, these nonprofit clearinghouses, the biggest and sort of most increasingly prominent of which is this Freedom Partners Chamber of Commerce. So they have to be able, that is both the Koch brothers and the operatives who they tap to run these operations and to disseminate this money, have to be able to come back to these donors and show that the money was being spent efficiently. And
absolutely.
Again,
there are only two things that these kinds of guys hate. It's their money being spent badly and their friends' money being spent badly.
Right.
So
and
Ken Vogel, I hope you'll stay on this story. Ken Vogel with Politico, thanks so much. And I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. We'll be right back on Take Action News.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Breast health awareness is critical for all women, particularly African Americans, because we have an increased risk of dying from breast cancer compared to women of other backgrounds. At U of M, I'm doing research here and with women in Ghana to look for an inherited link that makes African and African American women susceptible to a more aggressive type of cancer. Finding this link, I believe, will make new treatments possible. But right now, making sure that you are properly screened is our best protection.
With experts like Dr. Lisa Newman, the University of Michigan Health System is a leader in cancer care. When you call our free Cancer Answer line at 800-865-1125, an oncology nurse will answer any questions you might have about the prevention, screening, and treatment of breast cancer and other forms of cancer. All calls are confidential. Call 800-865-1125 or visit uofmhealth.org/canceranswerline.
We're working to help everyone enjoy longer, healthier lives.
That's the Michigan difference.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/Guard Reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. As a parent, you want to make sure that your child knows how to deal with bullying when they see it happening. And chances are they want to help, but they don't really know how. Well, teach them that the best thing to do is calmly walk away, find a teacher or other adult, and speak up. And do your part. Be that adult they can talk to and trust will listen. Join me to help stop bullying. Go to stopbullying.gov to find out more.
The true definition of hero. And being a hero took a heroic effort.
Every day we bring to our fans the world of sports. We speak of heroes and heroism, but there are days when sports matter little and heroes matter more. These heroes don't hit walk-off homers or buzzer-beating threes. They simply made a plan for what to do when disaster strikes. You never know when you might need to be the hero, because you never know if today is the day before a natural disaster. Prepare, plan, be a hero. Visit ready.gov.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
And we are back on Take Action News. This is Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and our theme this hour is things that Pete Seeger cared about. And one of the things Pete really didn't like was racism and prejudice. And with that in mind, our next guest is Travis Waldron. Travis is a reporter for thinkprogress.org, and he grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and works at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and he worked for Jack Conway. He's a good guy. So, Travis, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, speaking of racism, Redskins, Washington Redskins, the nation's capital, has a racial epithet to describe its beloved football team, and you've been all over that story, doing great work on it. That Dan Snyder and his refusal to change the name, but you found a couple different interesting angles on the coalition that Dan put together to protect this offensive name, in my opinion. Tell us a little bit about your story, if you would.
Yeah, so we started out with kind of wanting to put together a history of the name and the campaign against it, and it's fascinating that there have been these groups and activists fighting against not just the name of the Washington football team, but Native American imagery and mascots and logos in sports for decades now, and in the course they decided to oppose and really challenge this name. It's kind of the biggest, most well-known use of Native American imagery and names in sports, I think. And, the Redskins, for most of their history, have kind of ignored it. And we found out through the course of our reporting that they had actually leaned on a few top-tier Republican consultants to kind of figure out what their message was going to be on the name. From Frank Luntz to Ari Fleischer to former Senator and Governor George Allen, who, as you know, had his own racial flap during his 2006 Senate campaign. So,
did George Allen suggest they change it to the Washington Macaques? By any chance?
He did not.
And by the way, I also believe you. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I also thought I saw a Democratic name in there.
Yes, Lanny Davis.
Right.
So,
just when I thought I couldn't find him more objectionable. So what did they tell Dan Snyder about the Redskins name? What's their strategy?
Well, it's basically the same as it has been for quite some time. They, they leaned on the fact that this is historical, that Back in the 1930s, they chose this name to what they said was honor a man named Lone Star Dietz, who was the second head coach of the team, claimed that he was a Sioux Indian. The history behind him is shows that he might not have been, probably wasn't an Indian, based on the research that a historian named Linda Wagner did into him. And then, I had a few questions for him. I asked him to respond essentially to a lot of the claims that Native Americans had made to me in the course of my reporting. And the general manager of the team, Bruce Allen, in one of the emails said that the team did not need to bother responding to those ignorant requests. It's hard to tell if he was specifically referring to my request about the coach and whether he was a Native American or whether he was talking about all of my questions. But, it just gave off the vibe that they were very dismissive of the debate, or of the fact that people would even consider this offensive. And at the same time, the fact that they were leaning on all of these officials, these people with prominent paths in communication, suggests that they do care, and they do kind of feel maybe a little bit in danger when it comes to the campaign against them.
So part of the strategy is probably let's pretend that nobody in their right mind would care, even though, as you point out in the article, a number of organizations going back to at least 1980 have responded to these criticisms by changing team names, Stanford and so on. But, and the other question I want to ask, I was fascinated by the history of Lone Star Dietz, but in a sense, why does it matter? I mean, if any racial stereotype is involved in your mascot, then whether or not there's Stepin Fetchit was a historical figure, but it would be objectionable to use him today. Why would it matter, in a sense? Why would the use of an offensive term be justified by isn't this the old "some of my best friends are" kind of argument? I mean, how can you...
It sort of is, and I think that's a key point in this entire thing, is, it doesn't really matter. There's been a lot said about the origins of the word redskin, and whether it was racist and derogatory when it first started, which history suggests that it probably wasn't. There's been a lot of talk about how they got the name and how long they've had the name. And from the Native American perspective, none of that matters. What matters is that they find the name offensive now, and they find the word offensive now. And, the meaning, Charles Krauthammer made this argument in his column against the name, I think it was in October, when he said, the meaning of words can change, and the connotation of words can change. And regardless of the history behind this word or whatever, the history behind this name, for quite some time now, they've thought this was offensive. And a good example of this is at the University of Miami in Ohio, or Miami University, in Ohio, which is named for the Miami tribe. They used the name Redskins for a long time, and for part of that time with the blessing of the Miami tribe. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, the tribe came back and said, we don't want you to use this anymore. We think it's offensive. And Miami changed their name to the Redhawks in the 1990s. And that's a perfect example. These words, they can change meaning, they can change connotations, and the Washington Redskins, whatever their history is, it doesn't necessarily matter, because this is a word that people find offensive.
And yet, well, I guess I have a couple questions for you. One of them is, why is Dan Snyder so intransigent about it? Why wouldn't he take whatever goodwill he might get out of changing the name, not to mention whatever publicity, and go out there and say, look, I realize it was hurting people. Doesn't cost him any money. I mean, yeah, I guess he has to change the logos and all that, but on the grand scale of things, he'd get a lot more back in goodwill and in publicity than he'd ever spend to change the logo and the uniforms and so on. Why is he being so intransigent? Any idea?
Well, I think they make the financial argument. They say that it would cost a lot of money. In the trademark case against them, the suit in which Native Americans have sued and said that this word under federal law shouldn't be allowed to be trademarked, they've said that losing the trademark would cost them every financial loss imaginable, which is probably true, because if they keep the name and they can't trademark it, then everybody else can use it and make money off of it too. As far as changing the name goes, whether that would cost much money is in dispute. There's actually a research from a few professors that suggests that the college teams who have changed their names and logos haven't really lost much money at all. It's kind of made up, as you said, from goodwill, from new merchandise sales. People go out and buy the new stuff. It's not like anybody's making drastic requests here to say, like, change the colors and change your uniforms and change everything else. It's sort of change the name and, get
on with your lives. Yeah.
And,
if I were the judge in that trademark case, my Solomonic solution would be you can keep the trademark if you don't use it. How's that? So where is this going now? I mean, we've got Snyder being intransigent. We've got people like Alan and Ari Fleischer and Lanny Davis, who I find so objectionable that, Pete, we have to invite them on the show now. Make a note. But in 30 seconds or less, where is this case going?
It's gonna keep going. The trademark case could have a decision any day. That one's going to take some years to sort out because of the appeals process. The campaign against the name is, according to the activists, is going to continue. Ray Hallbritter from the Oneida Nation has called it a permanent campaign. They have pledged that they're going to keep on going. Dan Snyder's going to keep fighting it. But, these people say, these Native American activists say that this is inevitable, that they're going to win. And they eventually, whether it's today, whether it's next year, whether it's 10 years from now. And, I think they're going to keep fighting until they do.
I'm betting they're right. Travis Waldron, thanks so much for coming on, and I hope you'll keep us posted on this story.
I sure will. Thanks for having me.
You bet. This is RJ Eskow. We will be right back on Take Action News.
For me, guns are for hunting and protecting my family. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I'll fight to protect it. But with rights come responsibilities. That's why I support comprehensive background checks, so criminals and the dangerously mentally ill can't buy guns. That protects my rights and my family.
Tell Congress, don't protect criminals. Vote to protect gun rights and our families with comprehensive background checks. Demand action now.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Schuster, your host of Take Action News. On our show, we talk government, politics, and what you can do to have an impact. We're nonpartisan, report like hell, and let the chips fall where they may. We feature segments like social media, activists of the week, and the latest news affecting our communities. So join us every Saturday and make a difference. Yes, you and I, we can do this. That's Take Action News on the air, online, and at your podcast convenience on iTunes each week on the We Act Radio Network.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org. or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
100% success rate in modifying free consultation at 10%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit HUD.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
And we are back on Take Action News. This is Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, reporting and hosting. Our next and final guest is sticking with our theme of stories Pete Seeger cared about, but I'll tell you, we'd cover this story anyway because it is a very, very important one I think you're going to be hearing a lot about in the future. Chris Hanby is a reporter for the Center for Public Integrity. He has won all kinds of awards, well-deserved, but I'm going to skip them and get right to the story because it's very important. Chris has been writing on the connection between the coal industry and a prominent university and how that has affected miners infected with black lung disease. Chris, are you with us?
I'm here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, your story says that a year-long investigation shows that doctors and lawyers working at the behest of the coal industry have helped defeat the benefit claims of miners sick and dying of black lung, even as disease rates are on the rise, and you name a prominent university in doing that. That's strong stuff, so I know you have your facts. Tell us a little bit about this case, if you would.
Right. So the first installment in the series looked at the most prominent law firm that does this defense work for the coal companies. It's called Jackson Kelly PLLC. It's based in West Virginia, but it really has offices across the country. And so that first story examined their pattern over decades of withholding evidence that they'd obtained from their own reviewing physicians, showing that the miners had black lung, and in some cases the most advanced stages, yet they continue to fight the claim. And sometimes it had devastating effects for the miners. In the second installment in the series, we looked at the role of a group of doctors at Johns Hopkins University. They're professors at the medical school and doctors at the hospital, and these are radiologists. And what they've done for about 40 years now is read X-rays and CT scans for black lung. These are films that are sent to them by coal companies or the insurers or lawyers representing them, and they have a very long record of almost never finding black lung. They do commonly suggest other diseases, but this is even as other doctors are finding significant rates of black lung, and even after, in many of these cases, pathological evidence, so actually looking at the tissue of the lung itself, sometimes after
so let me
died.
step in and ask you a couple of questions, Chris, if I may. First, so the first is the law firm of Jackson Kelly. Second is John Hopkins and this unit of radiologists. In terms of Jackson Kelly, if I understand you correctly, when an attorney has clear evidence that A is true, isn't there an ethical challenge in going out and arguing that in fact A is not true?
Well, and that's the key question, and it's part of an ongoing court battle. Jackson Kelly's argument is that they didn't know that A is true. In other words, two of their experts, and the only two experts that they could find, and these are guys who reliably don't find black lung, but they did in this case. But they said, nonetheless, we didn't know that he had black lung. We just knew that those opinions existed, and we were under no obligation to provide them.
Well, that's one I'm sure you'll be following. And then the second one, Johns Hopkins. In a way, this is the most shocking revelation of all. We expect coal company lawyers somehow not to perhaps be the most upright individuals one might meet, but not that isn't a story well worth pursuing. But Johns Hopkins has a worldwide reputation for integrity. These are professors as well as physicians who, according to the accusation and according to the information, have been quite slanted, enough so that, as you report, Johns Hopkins Medicine has suspended its black lung program pending a review as a result of a Center for Public Integrity ABC News investigation. So what's going on there? You also write that these doctors didn't benefit personally. So what do you think is going on at Johns Hopkins?
Well, it's hard to know for sure. It's an unusual situation, certainly. Generally, people, and there are other doctors who do this at other institutions, and it's not just Johns Hopkins, but Johns Hopkins seems to be unique in that it's part of their jobs, actually, at Hopkins, and the money goes directly to Johns Hopkins, not to the doctors. Now, it's not clear, and Hopkins has denied that there's any, that these guys derive any personal financial benefit from these readings. So that part of it is not clear, and they're not a public institution, so we don't have access to that. But it is a somewhat interesting arrangement that you don't see elsewhere.
Well, I would say so. And as we look at it, you've been working on this story for some time now. What are the questions you feel haven't been answered yet in this story?
Well, there are a number that relate to Johns Hopkins. I mean, you mentioned that they're conducting an internal review. We have been asking them for more information about this, the nature of their review, who's conducting it, and they have just flatly refused to comment on this at all. So we, obviously would like to know whether this is going to, who's conducting this and what's going to be the quality of the review. We'd also like to know a lot more financial information about what happened at Johns Hopkins over the years, and we were initially told by Hopkins that they were going to provide us that information, and then they later did not provide it.
Well, now, we found that how many doctors were involved in this?
There were a number have come and gone over the years, but the story focuses on one who has been there for pretty much the entire 40-year period that this has been going on, and that's a guy named Dr. Paul Wheeler. But it's been anywhere from 3, 4, maybe 5 guys. This is a fairly small radiology unit, but they can churn through quite a large number of readings fairly quickly, so they can have a pretty outsized effect on a large number of cases.
Now, here's something that most of my readers or listeners don't know about me, which is that in a past life, I was the head of a medical management division of a major insurance company as an executive. I'm not a physician or anything. And I have to tell you that the kinds of behavior you're describing, not only does it seem outrageous in terms of medical ethics, but even, and believe it or not, there is such a term, even insurance ethics, it seems way out of bounds for me. I had medical directors work for me for years, and I can't, and I'm medical advisors, second opinion people, I can't conceive of a situation where physicians would see x-rays or MRIs or anything over and over that appear to overwhelmingly point to one conclusion and yet consistently say that that conclusion isn't accurate. To me, it's almost unthinkable. So have you found any evidence of this perhaps being exclusive to the coal industry, which I don't know at all, wasn't involved with? Were other doctors doing this? Is it localized to Johns Hopkins? I mean, I guess my last question for you is this an extreme example of an industry, extreme example of a medical unit, or perhaps we don't know yet?
Well, it's hard to know for sure, but I think that Johns Hopkins is unique in this case in that in the number of readings that they've done and the length of time that they've been doing that, and I think that reflects largely on how effective they've been in cases because of the prestige associated with their names. But there are other universities and doctors that do this, although it's not clear that the arrangement is quite the same as Johns Hopkins. And also I would mention that the Johns Hopkins unit primarily does black lung now, but also has been involved in asbestos claims and does industrial monitoring for some companies. So it may not entirely be confined to black lung. We don't know. It's just a very hard universe to define.
Well, Chris Hamby, I hope you'll stay on this story because it's very important. You're doing great work here, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
So this is Richard Eskow. We have just completed another episode of Take Action News. We've handled technology. We've handled the causes that were dear to Pete Seeger's heart. We've talked about the State of the Union, both real and the speech. Please stick with us next week where we have more compelling stories for you. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you'll come back. I'm Richard Eskow, and you've been listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there.